No, I've been sitting here because there's a little confusion in my head. I was in graduate school at the time when the Space Shuttle Challenger actually blew up shortly after launch, and sometimes I forget. I took a year off after my bachelor's degree before I went to graduate school, and I was saying 31 years. Actually, it is the 30th anniversary today of that terrible tragedy, and it really was for a lot of us of a particular generation who grew up on the space program. It always seemed that all we did was make progress, and it was a setback that I think a lot of us struggle to deal with. We're joined this morning by a guest on our program who also had some uh, ties to the space program. If you go to his house and you go into his home office, there's some memorabilia on his walls, hanging on his walls, left behind by some of his friends who were actually astronauts in the Apollo era. And he was serving in the U.S. Air Force at the time, the height of American space exploration. And as this tragedy unfolded, he was near the end of his 20 years in the Air Force. He was asked to be the administrator of the investigation, the Shuttle Challenger Commission. It's 23. It's coming up on 9:08. Bill Colley this morning with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Normally, I like to introduce the guest first by name, but I've given him somewhat of an introduction. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hyle joining us this morning on the program. And first of all, welcome back.
Always my pleasure to be back.
You were telling me in the past. We've talked about this before. You got the telephone call, and you were sent to the White House when they were putting this commission together. And you spent a good day and a night waiting to get in for the meeting before you actually got the appointment, which I think says a lot about how busy things were at the time as people were trying to deal with the tragedy and yet still go forward with it. So your first day on the job was essentially waiting for someone to talk to you for a good 12 hours or so.
Well, I showed up at the White House at 8 o'clock on a very cold February morning, and I finally interviewed at 10 o'clock that night. I had a 2-minute interview. They hired me on the spot, and I worked 4 more hours before I even went home, and I wasn't officially on the commission yet. But that's how um, that's how intense this whole thing was and remained for many months. But what a thing to be a part of, and being a history buff and always loved the space program and fascinated by it. It was, I'm sorry it took a tragedy from me to play a part in it, but I was blessed to be able to do that.
And you worked with some people, of course, who, when it comes to not just the space program, but maybe the pantheon of American heroes, you worked with a lot of really big names on that commission. Neil Armstrong, obviously, being the one that is, I think, that is most Americans were in awe of at the time.
Well, Neil was the one of the commissioners. There were 13 commissioners that this blue ribbon panel of commissioners that Reagan appointed. The chairman was Bill Rogers, former Secretary of State, and Neil was the vice chairman, and then the rest ran the gamut from Chuck Yeager at one end of the spectrum, Sally Ride, and in the middle of all this was a guy named Dr. Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who was hired by Oppenheimer right out of Princeton and went off to New Mexico and became part of that team that put the atom bomb together, the Manhattan Project.
I have to say that some of those personalities, and maybe egos is a better way to put it, could fill up a room on their own. So you've got all of these people in a room, and your job is to essentially ride herd on all of this. How do you do that?
It's hard enough to herd cats, but it's even harder to herd egotistical cats. But and I have to ask myself that question from time to time, but somehow I made it work and kept my job.
I had a
uh,
I had an old girlfriend, and her brother-in-law worked with Yeager when Yeager was still on active duty, and just said, he said, and look, nothing against Yeager, but he said he's more full of himself than any person I've ever met in my life. And then you've got Sally Ride, who I guess was the same way. and in some of these scientists as well. Uh, yeah, it's very difficult some days, I'm sure, not just look around the room and say, "Will you please shut up?"
Yeah, and there were clashes, and as we went forward, and uh, lots of flaring of tempers. It wasn't unlike maybe a hockey team, whatever else. These guys would disagree vehemently, but they all eventually came back and wrote what was has probably become the icon of all presidential commission reports, only from the standpoint of the way we approached it and then the way it was written. And so it all worked out in the end. And I was, like I said, blessed to be a part of that little bit of history.
Our guest is Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hyle joining us this morning. He was the administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission, 913 and 25 right now. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Of course, at the time we didn't know it, but it really was, I hate to say this, the last gasp of space exploration in this country. At least everything just kind of started to wind down slowly, but it started to wind down at that point. And then NASA today is just a shell of what it used to be, and I would imagine you're very disappointed.
Well, yes, I am, because it the space program, and it was so successful, given what NASA was all about and the challenges they faced and how quickly they rose to the occasion to go from standing on the Earth to, in 7 years, putting a man on the moon, and so many other things came out of that program that people don't even realize from an engineering and technological standpoint. But it was certainly very expensive to do. But I just hate to see us lose our place to the extent that now we have to rely on our enemies to take our astronauts to the International Space Station. That really grinds on me, to say the least.
And the other angle on that is there was a directive a few years ago that NASA should be it's one of its primary missions, if not the primary mission, should be outreach to the Muslim world, which for a space program that seems maybe it's the crescent moon, but it seems like it's an odd mission.
Oh, it's beyond odd. It's I don't even know really how to characterize it, but it's uh, so far removed from the reality of what it should be. That program should not be a part of the great social experiment that the Obama administration has foisted upon us. And of all the places, I don't know of any Muslim that would probably even know how to. I mean, they know how to set off rockets. They're called IEDs, but that's about it, you know. And now to say that they have to be a part of that program or even contribute to it is just so much hot air.
The notion is that you put science aside for political correctness.
Yes, yeah, and it's inconceivable that anybody who had any kind of an agenda that was good for America or for America progressing and going forward to even consider NASA as one of those agencies, if you will, or instruments to do that, just demonstrates what the real crux and the heart of Barack Obama's real agenda is for the country.
You served under 5 presidents. You've got Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan. When you see Barack Obama, I don't. My question would be, how would you have tolerated having to serve under a president like that?
I'm glad I didn't have to. tolerate that. I think it would have been very difficult because he's the commander in chief. I mean, that's the president's first real, true responsibility, as far as I'm concerned, is commander in chief. Because if the country isn't secure, then none of this other stuff matters. And to have someone like him in that position is, it's, well, as we all know, it's dangerous, and you see where it's brought us, and we're going to pay the consequences big time for it, and probably sooner rather than later.
Of course, you had to deal with Jimmy Carter during that 4 years, and I'm sure that was difficult enough. Carter, many people think, was one of the least or most inept presidents in American history. How does he rank, I guess, alongside Obama?
Well, I do have to say, at least Jimmy Carter was a patriot. Uh, he wasn't an America hater. He just had his priorities skewed by whatever. I'm not even so much sure it was his religion. He made a lot about that, but at base, and I knew people who were close to him at the time, and found out he wasn't really the goody two shoes that the face he presented to the public in that regard. Um, but he, of course, now by comparison to Obama, he was a good guy. I mean, that's how, and I would never have said that before Obama, because I used to, and still do, really pan him for his ineptitude. But it didn't in any way rise to the level of what we see with what we have now.
And we should point out at one time you were a Democrat, and so you're not just somebody who's a lifelong Republican going after President Obama's image because he's on the other side. I mean, you've been on both sides of that divide.
Well, I've always, particularly when it came to the president, I've always voted for the man, and not the party, and so that's true. Um, Actually, the first time I was able to vote for a president, I voted for Lyndon Johnson because I thought Goldwater was absolutely a wacko. But then I was part of that liberal campus environment and at the time, and so I was taken in by it. But yeah,
Well,
I've been on both sides of the aisle.
hold on to your thoughts for a few minutes because I want to. Speaking of that, we're going to talk about Roger Ailes in a couple of minutes. Can you stick around?
Sure.
All right. Steve went to college with Roger Ailes, and since he referenced his college years, Ailes in the news this week, of course, because his what you might call tiff with Donald Trump. Details coming up in just a few minutes. We're spending a few more minutes this morning with Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hyle, who I mentioned was the administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission, the anniversary of that explosion 30 years ago today, and was detailing where NASA has gone and some of those other issues during the course of our conversation this half hour. It's 9:24. It's 25. Bill Colley with you as well on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And just before the break, you had mentioned your college years at Ohio University, and being that it was a lot more liberal back then than it currently is. And, of course, I'm sure once you actually got into the Air Force and they shipped you out to Utapao in Thailand, it changed some of your views about the world and politics. So I think that's probably easily said, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. When you leave that crazy, well, and it wasn't. It was only about 10% as bad as it is today on our college campuses, which I think are nothing but a cesspool of liberal vipers. But and I'm being kind, but but yeah, you go back out into the real world, and and you grow up very quickly. And that's one thing I have to say about a military experience. It does give you that opportunity, if you take advantage of it, to uh, mature and grow up faster than you might otherwise. And it did that for me, certainly.
The recruiting office is sending a check right now. Uh,
They are. They are. I'm on retainer.
yes. Roger Ailes was a classmate at Ohio University, and this week he waded into that dispute at Fox because he's running Fox News. He waded into
Yes.
that dispute with Donald Trump over tonight's Fox debate. Now, Bob Beckel says he can't imagine that Roger actually wrote that press release, and but Fox says yes, Roger wrote that. Uh, you're looking at this, I'm sure, and knowing Roger Ailes as you do, he's a bit of a showman too, isn't he?
Oh yeah, very much so. He's really out there. He's not so much as he used to be, but he certainly is, and he's like everybody else who rises to those positions. Sometimes his ego overcomes his intellect, and I think this is a pure case of it.
Well, I heard Roger speak. I was at a convention in 1998, Radio Television News Directors Association, and Roger was on a panel. Tom Johnson at the time was running CNN, and the audience was literally hostile to Ailes at the time because you well know this. A lot of your television industry, here's a shocker, is run by liberals. Your television news industry, and there was Ailes on stage, and Fox had that reputation at the time of being, far right wing, which I think we've learned isn't quite true. I mean, it's not anywhere near as conservative as it promotes itself, or it did promote itself. But to wade into this with Trump like he did, it appears that no one can quite tell yet who did more damage to whom. I guess, and you're a longtime political observer too, having managed some campaigns and the like. When you look at that, who's going to come out of this looking better?
I really think Trump is, and I'm not necessarily ready to say I'm endorsing Donald Trump, but I think this was a genius move on his part. I think he may have seen some handwriting on the wall and saw that he was not going to perhaps do as well in Iowa as he would like, and didn't want to give Fox that opportunity right before the debate to ambush him, and really he would have done more damage to himself. This way, you don't have to win the Iowa caucus to go on and become president. Bush didn't win in Iowa, and other presidents who became president didn't always win the Iowa caucus. And I think in that sense, it'll be interesting to see how the ratings go for this particular debate compared to the others.
If Trump announces this afternoon that he's buried the hatchet, it'll be sky high. But I get the feeling that's a little late in the game now for that to happen.
Well, yeah, I think so, but it's just the world is upside down, and I just wrote a little blog piece, my comment by Hank, my cat, that at the end I said, Fox is no longer fair and balanced. Fox News is now unfair and unbalanced, and and I think they're going down that road.
Well, Colonel, I want to thank you much for your time this morning, and as always, good hearing from you. And I'm sure we'll be talking sometime soon because you never are shy or short of an opinion. And say hello to Hank and the rest of the family, and Linda and Lori as well.
Okay, I'm outside, actually on our deck, and there's a drone flying over right now. So I must get back in the house. They're looking for me.
Yeah, no more of those one-fingered salutes when they go over. Well, have a great day.
Okay, Bill.
Thank you.
See you later.
Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hyle joining us this morning on the program. He was the administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission, college classmate of Roger Ailes from Fox News. We've got one more half hour coming up.